Okay, everyone, welcome back yet again. We are moving now from the Stoicism playlist out of the primer series and into the realm of the Titans, as it were. As I concluded the final part of the three-part primer to Stoicism, I said we were going to go into the source material and look at some of the great minds of Stoic philosophy, and three in particular. Now, these aren't the only three, but in my mind and in a lot of people's opinion, these three men are the titans of Stoic philosophy. If you only read these three, you will have a very good grasp of what it means to be a Stoic and what Stoic philosophy tries to convey to people as a whole. All right. So I also spoke about how I personally became aware of Stoicism, and I'll show you in a moment here. It actually started with Seneca, and he's the first titan we begin with. My road to Stoicism was kind of led the same way I think many men kind of find Stoicism, is that when you're younger, things don't come as easy to you. Nobody respects you. No one cares what you really have to say. They say you don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. You're just frustrated all the time. You don't feel like life is moving fast enough for you, and you wonder why you don't have the things you want and why it's so hard to get those things. So it's only when you discover Stoicism and I guess your small role in the universe that things become clear. But I'll get to that as we talk more about Seneca's writings, and I'll go over some passages that hit me like a ton of bricks. But anyway, a brief biography of Seneca. His full name, Lucius Annaeus Seneca, also known as Seneca the Younger. He was born in 4 BC in Cordoba, Spain, which at the time was a territory of the Roman Empire, and he died in 65 AD in Rome. So he, died just shy about 70 years, which back in those days, it's a pretty full life. However, we'll find out that how he met his end, I'm sure was, something he would have not chosen for himself, but nevertheless it happened. So Seneca was born into a wealthy family. His father, Seneca the Elder, was a well-known rhetorician and writer in Rome. So he was born into a wealthy family. I believe his mother's family was also of the patrician class. So he was born into the upper class of Rome. As such, he was educated in literature, grammar, and rhetoric. I'm sure his father wanted that for him. So you can imagine, as someone educated in the upper class who was getting his schooling in literature, grammar, and rhetoric, he was going to be a lawyer or he was going to be a politician. So no surprise, he goes on to become a senator in Rome. But while he is serving as a senator, he ends up getting into the uglier politics of Rome at the time. And during this era, the Roman politics were very ugly. There was a lot of scandal, and there was a lot of degeneracy, to kind of put it, pretty blunt. He was sent into exile by the Emperor Claudius. Claudius, at this time, actually chose exile for Seneca, despite the fact that the Senate had voted for his execution. And this was all over some accusation that he had an affair with, I believe her name was Julia Livilla. I think that's her name. She was a sister of Caligula, who was a prior emperor, and the sister of Agrippina. So they alleged that Seneca was involved in this affair. It was a scandal, and they wanted him dead. Claudius, figured, well, I'll just kick him out of Rome. Like, that'll be the consolation prize. We'll just get rid of him. So he goes into exile for about 8 years, and he writes a lot of Stoic philosophy down while he is in this exile. And exile in the ancient times was much different than these days. You can't just like drive a mile and a half outside into the country and then start walking, another 40 miles and not find your way back. But in these days, if you were dropped off, a couple hours outside of Rome, you were in the wilderness. And the barbarians out there, if they thought you were a Roman, they could sell you into slavery, they could kill you, they could work you to death, whatever. So exile was a significant punishment in those days. But nevertheless, Agrippina, of all people, persuades Claudius to commute Seneca's sentence and has him recalled to Rome in 49 AD. Now, why did Agrippina do this? Or how could she do this? Well, I was just saying that in this era, there was a lot of scandal in Rome. Agrippina actually married her uncle Claudius, the emperor. So her uncle, she married him. I guess that wasn't a scandal. But she did this because, she had ulterior motives in mind. She knew Seneca was an educated man, a very well-regarded man as far as scholarly circles go. So she figured, I'll bring this guy back. He's going to owe us a favor, me a favor. So she recruited Seneca to be the tutor of her son Nero, who was going to be the future emperor of Rome. Seneca obviously didn't really have a whole lot of say in this. He agreed to become the tutor of Nero. And it was during this time that Seneca wrote even more essays and notes on Stoicism. In particular, on clemency, he wrote it specifically for young Nero. And it's believed that in the early years of Nero's tutelage, he was quite impressionable to Stoicism. It was having an effect. But as he grew older and as he became aware of the power he was going to inherit from Claudius and how he was going to become, the unquestionable authority in the civilized world, the less he started to care about other people's opinions. And even Seneca was not having much of an effect on him. He wrote on clemency, hoping that Nero would start showing people mercy. Because as we know from history, Nero was quite a vicious SOB. Probably in the top 3, or at least top 3 or 5, maybe top 3, definitely top 5 worst emperors in Roman history, without a doubt. It's a shame because, Seneca, a brilliant mind, gets to tutor Nero. Nero ends up being a dirtbag. Aristotle gets to tutor Alexander the Great, who goes on to become one of the most famous military leaders of all time, and lives a brief life, but a magnificent life. Nero, not so much. So what happens? Seneca tries to retire from public life twice. Nero tells him, no, I'm not going to let you retire. You're going to keep working for the empire, and you're going to be in my employ. And then after enough years go by, a Pisonian conspiracy is uncovered. It's never really substantiated, but it's believed that because Nero was so suspicious of everyone around him, people started to make accusations against other people, hoping that that would gain favor for them, and Nero would side with them, believing that they had saved him from a conspiracy. And fortunately, Seneca was caught up in one of these accusations. So it was unsubstantiated that Seneca was actually in on the plot to overthrow or kill Nero. But Nero, at this time had become so corrupt he didn't care. He ordered Seneca to commit suicide. That was his sentence for the accusation of conspiracy. So Seneca, being the Stoic that he was, and he was a admirer of Socrates. And as we know, Socrates was also condemned to suicide by drinking hemlock. But in Seneca's case, he returned home he drafted his will, and he had several properties in Rome. He was quite wealthy at this point in his life. He had amassed a pretty good fortune, but now he was, being left to disperse it among his heirs. He drew himself a hot bath. He slashed his wrists, and he succumbed, and he died in 65 AD under the orders of his former pupil, Nero. But Nero ended up getting his, I believe, as Nero was near the end of his reign, he was stabbed to death by his Praetorian Guard in the catacombs underneath Rome. So Nero got shanked by his own bodyguards, so he got his. Anyway, that's the brief biography of Seneca. I'm going to do a couple readings now from his work on anger. And he wrote on anger for, I believe his brother requested him to draft some letters and some notes about how one should deal with anger. How do we get beyond it? How do we deal with this emotion? And there are several other philosophers. I think Precipice wrote, and Precipice was also Stoic. He wrote letters on anger. So Seneca took this opportunity and said, I will write my own letters on anger and give you my Stoic impressions of how a Stoic should approach this emotion. So I'll read some excerpts from this book, which I believe is probably the best collected work you can buy. If you only buy one book, that is a compilation of Seneca's work, Anger, Mercy, Revenge. I'll put a link in the below. This is a must-have in every Stoic library. This is how I found Stoicism, and in particular, this passages on anger and how to deal with your personal anger, especially as a young man who, is quick to anger because, as I said, things just don't come easily to him. Anyway, I will put up a read-along with these passages so you can follow. So number one, we go to page 54 on anger. He says, when more powerful people wrong us, we must bear it not just patiently, but with a smile. They'll do it again if they believe they've succeeded. This is the worst feature of minds grown arrogant with great fortune. They also hate those whom they've harmed. Okay, so what does that mean? So what Seneca is telling the reader to do is to understand that powerful people have the ability to harm you, either because of their wealth or their status. This is beyond our control. They have it within their power to do this to you. But again, you have the domain over everything up here. So when they harm you, you do it with patience and a smile. Because if they see you are bothered by this harm, they will do it again. If you're patient and you smile, they will see it has no effect and they may move on. The worst feature of this inclination to cause harm comes from the arrogance of great fortune, because people who have this status and wealth eventually will come to look down upon people who don't, and they will hate you for not being as rich and as powerful as they are. So I think this quote, even though Seneca didn't know what lie in store for his future, was prescient, because as we saw, Nero, his pupil, who was more powerful and more wealthy than he was, ended up ordering his death, and he accepted it with patience. Perhaps not a smile, but he accepted it all the same. That's an interesting quote to read, that Seneca had followed through on what he wrote on anger as it came to him at the end of his life. All right, moving to page 67. This is the one that actually hit me pretty hard. This is the one I I really had to sit down and stew over, because it was something that I needed to read when I read it as a younger man. So he says on page 67, "To take vengeance is to acknowledge pain. A great spirit is not bowed down by a wrong. The one who has harmed you is either stronger or weaker than you. If he is weaker, give him a break. If he's stronger, give yourself a break." Okay. That's a fantastic quote. It really makes you think about what it means to suffer a wrong and jump to the immediate emotion of anger and vengeance. It's like, I will seek vengeance for this wrong that has been done to me. I will put my anger into my hands, and I will bring back the pain that was visited on me, and I will pound it into whoever gave it to me twofold, tenfold if I like. This spirit of vengeance does not bow a great spirit, because he realizes as a Stoic, number one, the person who harmed you is either greater or weaker than you. If he is weaker than you and he has given you this harm, there is no glory or honor in giving pain to someone who is weaker than you. There's an old adage that a fly may sting a horse many times, but regardless of the stings, one is a fly and the other is a horse. That's true, right? The fly, being weaker than the horse, can sting the horse, but it doesn't matter how many times the stings happen. One is just a fly while the other is a proud horse. And secondly, if he's stronger than you, if you are overcome by this anger, as I said in the quote, for someone who is of greater fortune and status than you, you should give yourself a break, because if you try to seek vengeance, and if you take this anger that you carry with you and hope to harm the person who has harmed you, but they are greater, you will then begin a cycle of injury and then vengeance, injury and then vengeance. And if the person is stronger than you, you will not win in that cycle. So if you are greater than the person, give them mercy. They're beneath you anyway. And if they're above you, don't walk into that cycle of injury and vengeance, because you will not walk out of it after enough times. Good advice. Good advice. Okay. And continuing on that, we go to page 84 on anger. Quote, "You go on. Well then, is he to get off scot-free? No, not even if you wanted him to. The greatest punishment for doing wrong is having done it, and no one suffers more grievously than the person sentenced to regret it." Okay, this goes back to when someone has done you wrong and has prompted you to anger and has given you motivation and even reason to seek revenge. Do I just let him go? Do I let him get off scot-free? Seneca's saying no, and not even if you wanted to, because the greatest punishment for doing wrong is having done it, right? When someone gives insult to another person, they give more insult to themselves by lowering themselves to that objective, right? I am going to insult this person. I'm going to harm them. I am going to give them pain. The person receiving that pain feels that pain, but the person who gives that pain is the one who made the conscious effort to do so. So the person who suffers more grievously is the person that suffers the regret of having done it. Some people say, well, yeah, what if he doesn't regret it? Everyone who knows him and knows what he's done regrets it for him. They see that person who was brought to that condition of wanting to do pain to someone, and they feel regret for them. It's like, every time you say, I wish this person just hadn't done that. I mean, why'd you have to do that? People feel regret for you. Also, if you are a decent person and you do administer this pain to someone, you do seek to cause injury or insult, and you feel regret after it, that pain lasts. You may have handed someone a beating and they get hurt, right? Physically, perhaps mentally. But the hurt and the pain will go away as their body heals. but the regret you have for having done it, you carry with you. Those are the scars that, take longer to heal, and they never really do heal completely. For example, you could hold something in your hand that's fragile and beautiful, like a ornate vase, right? And it's a work of art. And you hold it gently in your hand and you admire it. But let's say you are overcome with rage, you are overcome with emotion, and the person who has given you this vase, right, to admire, you want to do them insult or injury. So you smash the vase on the ground and it blows into 1,000 pieces. It's scattered everywhere. And immediately you regret what you've done. You desperately want to make amends. You pick up every piece. You spend all day and all night, several nights, piecing the vase together. You glue it perfectly. It looks symmetrically the exact same as before you smashed it. And then you hold it again, but you still know where all the seams are. You can still see where you've glued everything together. It's never going to be the same. So when you give yourself over to anger and you smash that vase, despite the fact that you may take all the pain and necessary measures to put everything back together, it will never be what it once was. And that's the regret. And other people will see this vase and they will see what your anger made you do to it. They will regret that you didn't have more self-control. You personally will probably regret having done such a thing and letting yourself be driven to that state of rage. And that's another thing too, is that Seneca mentions in one of his readings that rage is like a precipice on a cliff. Many men will walk up to that cliff. They will take their anger and they will put their feet on that precipice of anger. And it's that moment of rage that they just decide to fling themselves off. And as they fling themselves off, they're just in free fall. And it's exhilarating, right? It's like to give yourself over to rage, to just ball up your fists and to just put your chin down and to just say, I'm going to feel pain and I'm going to give pain, and it's going to be a rush. It's going to feel like I'm falling. And you are. Because after enough free fall, you reach terminal velocity. And that terminal velocity is wrath. And wrath is one of the 7 deadly sins. It's probably the most deadly. Because that wrath is when you hold that vase, and as the rage cocks that arm up, the wrath brings the hand down and releases the vase. And once that vase hits the ground, the wrath is complete. There's no going back. You will hit the bottom of that cliff. And that's where I sort of realized I was when it came to Stoicism. I was the guy who would let myself throw my body, throw my heart and soul off that cliff so that I could just feel that rage. And then I would, administer wrath, and I would pound the pavement as I made it to the bottom. And I would climb up all the way back to the top of that cliff. I would put my feet over the edge and I would do it all over again. The problem with this cycle is that if you do it enough times, eventually you will not be able to climb your way back to the top. And there are two things that define people with wrath. It's either aversion or conflict. If people see you as an angry person who chooses to be wrathful, they will avoid you for the most part. The majority of people will avoid you. But if you are a wrathful person and you encounter another wrathful person, they will relish the chance to match your wrath against theirs. They will see who could be more evil, who could hurt someone else worse. Is my wrath greater than your wrath? And that is self-destruction. But those are your only two options. The wrathful person is doomed to either ostracism or conflict. And the internal conflict that you will go through in either of those scenarios is its own version of hell. So this is a bit of a longer video, and I could say I'll conclude it with this one last reading from On Anger by Seneca. And this is towards the end. This is page 96, stanza 43. Any time now we'll cough up our last. We learn to live and let live. Be that which is best in human quality, because death will come for both sinner and saint alike before you can turn around. That one I kind of paraphrased. It's the way it's written in the translation is a little bit harder to understand, but what he's saying is that, time will come for everybody. If we don't live and let live, we are just giving ourselves a harder row to hoe in life for everybody we meet and for ourselves alone. Because before you know it, death will come to you. Death will be at your shoulder, and it will not care who is a saint and who is a sinner, and it will be there before you can turn around. So with the time we have on this earth, let us live and let live. Learn to forgive, learn to foster virtue so that we can know wisdom, and that wisdom can bring us to happiness, as a Stoic would tell you to do. Okay, I will stop it here. It's going to go even longer. I could keep reading, but On Anger is a great one to sit over and read several times. But I will continue with part 2 of Seneca. We will read parts from On Clemency, and as I said, that was written for Emperor Nero by Seneca. And then we will move on to number 2 of the Stoic Titans after that part. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and take it easy.